Hello and welcome to the West Tigers podcast. This is episode number 120, joined by regular Gary Watson. And we've got a special guest on tonight. We had Joel Helms, a regular on the podcast, on a couple of weeks ago, and now we've got Steve Stretton. Steve was on earlier in the season, and like Joel, he's been very busy in his professional career, but he's been lucky enough to join us tonight. How you going, Steve?
Yeah, good, thanks, Eddie. Good to see you guys and talk Tigers stuff.
Absolutely. Now, boys, in part one tonight, we're going to be just dissecting the game, the 28-16 victory over Canterbury. But in part two, we want to try and get a bit of viewer interaction going in the future. And we wanted to ask fans, get their opinions on what would their top three priorities be if they were Justin Pascoe or the board going forward for the West Tigers. So I'm going to ask you, Steve and Carrie, and we're going to get Joel on in part two as well. I'm going to ask you guys, what would be your priorities and in what order, given the club is in a bit of a state of flux? And we're also going to be talking about the documentary. Part two aired, or episode two aired last night. Very interesting one, given it carried a couple of those diabolical losses early in the year. So a fair bit to unpack tonight, boys. Gary, let's start with you. Did you have a word to describe that win over the Bulldogs on Sunday?
Relief. We finally got a win. It was against a terrible team. We played terrible, but we got a win. So there was a bit of relief there that we could finally get on the winners board.
Could have been worse, Steve. What do you reckon? Yeah, well, Gary started off positive, so I'll say positive as well. You know, it was satisfactory. It was nice to get it, but I think my word would still be something like mediocre.
Yeah, Gary, it was one of those games where I felt like, you know, I think Declan tipped the Bulldogs last week, and I'm not sure you might have tipped the Bulldogs. I said that I'd watched the Bulldogs a fair bit this year, and they are diabolical. I think you called them the worst team you've ever seen. I thought they lived up to that on Sunday. I thought they were absolutely atrocious.
Yeah, I think you really have to go back to the late 90s and go back to a little bit of our heritage of the Magpies, those last couple of years of the Magpies, to find a team that's kind of challenging this Bulldogs team to being as poor as they were on the weekend and throughout the season. I think if we play anyone else on Sunday other than the Bulldogs, I think we would have got lapped. We were really poor. It was just that they were worse.
Did you get that feeling, Steve, as well, that, you know, if we would be in big trouble, particularly in that that first half, if we were to come up against a side that was on?
Yeah, look, it's just been the same all year, hasn't it? Like, there'll be moments in games where we look good. There'll be flashes of brilliance. There'll be some good stuff. You know, you might even say we might put a half of football together that's decent, but then it's followed up. You know, a good moment is followed up by a poor moment, which is usually compounded by another poor moment, by an error. And the weekend was the same, and it's been the same all year. And, you know, really, I don't expect it to be any different this coming weekend.
You mentioned the errors there, Steve. Like, do you think, I'll stay with you, mate, do you think they're skill errors or mental errors, or is it a coaching deficiency? Because there were just some things there that you couldn't blame Madge for. I mean, Moses Mbai, an experienced player, just taking that ball that was going over the sideline and putting his foot on the sideline, something you wouldn't see in under 18s.
Yeah, look, that moment, I still haven't gone next door and apologised to my neighbours, because I just could not believe that he attempted to take that ball when it was so close to the sideline. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. But to answer your question, look, this sounds like a cop-out, but it's a combination of everything, you know, like the coaching staff, not just Madge, the coaching staff have to take responsibility for, you know, on-field direction and strategy. Like, what's the attacking structure? What's the defensive structure? What are they doing at training all week to work towards perfecting that structure? Because it's elite football, so they should be perfecting it. But it's also player attitude and you know, and something that I'll mention later when we talk about the doco. Something that just occurred to me, or it didn't occur to me, but was really solidified last night, is they're just so young. You know, they're such a young team, and they just make young errors. You know, lack of experience, can't stay in the contest, can't be mentally tough for 80 minutes. You know, because of that lack of experience, I suppose.
One of the interesting points you just made then, Steve, was about them being really young sort of errors and immature sort of errors from players. But a lot of times it's not really our young players making those errors. And by running into touch with that kick isn't a young player. So quite often we do see those errors from the young players, but it's across our squad. It's even our senior players make those sort of really dumb rookie kind of errors. And I think that's where it kind of falls back to what are we doing on the coaching side of stuff, because it's across the board, those errors, not just those young guys.
Do you think, Gary, it's a concentration thing that players need to work on themselves individually, or it is you're focusing in on sort of Madge and maybe there's a lack of a game plan there where some of these errors come about?
Well, I spoke last week about what I was looking to see this week to kind of see that coaching come through. And it was about Dewey playing the game like he played a couple of weeks ago, where he was straightening the attack and he was creating room for his outside men. Again, he was going far too across field on the weekend. So, again, we had a team, our forwards laid the platform. But again, I think we're still failing to take advantage of that by playing too across field. And that really comes down to that game planning side of stuff. I really want to see us start to straighten the attack instead of going far too left or right. And to me, that's where the coaching side and that's where the lack of game plan comes through. As we saw in the documentary last night, Maguire says we have a pretty simple game plan, but we're not straightening the attack. And that's, to me, where the issue's falling.
So the question that I think comes out of that is it the game plan that's not there, or is it that it's not being communicated effectively, or is it that it's not being executed effectively? Like it could be a combination of all those, but somewhere there's got to be a majority. Where does the majority lie in that?
Well, to me, I think it has to kind of fall back to the coaching side of it. I think it's when you see how Dewey played a couple of weeks ago, and it was so simple, the little changes he made to his game that allowed him to create that space for Dane Laurie and for those outside men. It was really turning the hips inwards and biting back into the line before looking to ball play. Now, the last 2 weeks, he's gone away from that again. Now, that's a really simple change. Now, maybe he's being told that and it's going straight out of his head as soon as he runs onto the field. But the fact that he was able to accomplish that a couple of weeks ago, and then the last 2 weeks, we haven't seen that at all, that suggests to me that little message, that really simple little message about straightening the attack first. And at times it's easier said than done, but it is quite a simple adjustment in your play. And that's not there. And that's where, to me, I don't think he's received that message.
I think it's shared responsibility, boys. Like you said, that the coaching staff would obviously have full input into the game plan. But one of the things that concerns me about our team is the guys that are touching the ball most and have ownership of that game plan are your spine. And they are, like you mentioned, Adam Dewey, and then you've got Jacob Liddell and Luke Brooks, and we had Mby this week. We've had Dane Laurie for most of the season. Let's start with Jacob Liddell, because he's one that I get frustrated with, Gary, because he makes that early try with a beautiful burst of speed. He's shown moments this season where he can really have a devastating impact, but then other times inside the opposition 20, far too many times, I feel like he doesn't have that nous or ability to pick out the right pass at the right time. Is that unfair or not?
Look, I've been disappointed in his service from dummy half. I think far too often, it's not so much that it's slow off the ground. It's more that it's not out in front of the players all the time. The player has to slow down to kind of catch the ball. Sometimes it's behind them, but it doesn't even always have to be behind them. It might just cause the player to slow down a little bit, and that's getting us off the front foot. I do think he's playing too many minutes. Even on the weekend where we had him go off and Mby came on, he was still starting to look a bit tired towards the end of that. I also really don't like that change of putting Mby into hooker. I think would be much better served having Simpkin on the bench. But one thing I do want to stick up for him for, I'm pretty sure it was an ACL injury that he did at the end of last year. Now, they're a long injury to come back from. Even Andrew Johns and a few other players have come back from ACL injuries, and it takes them another 12 months to kind of get back to their best and get that confidence in that knee again. So I think that could be a little bit of an issue that's playing on his mind, but the service really does need to improve.
Steve, what are you seeing from Jacob? Because I was sort of, even though we lost Harry in the off season, he was clearly our best player last year. I didn't think this position would be potentially a problem going forward, but now given the new rules and the way these games are going, your dummy half's got to be spot on. Do you see him as a long-term hooker?
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think that him and Simpkin can be a long-term option, either or both of them. I don't disagree with anything Gary just said there. I think he's probably lost a fair bit of confidence this year. That's generally through losing, but also that his game probably hasn't got back to where it was as quickly as he'd like it, and that's probably affecting him. I don't think his service is slow. I think his service is satisfactory in that way, but his passing is erratic. That's for sure. And it's actually interesting that in the documentary that we're watching, Maguire has mentioned that a number of times about getting the ball out in front of players, and he's not bringing the forwards onto the ball, and he needs to do that every pass every time.
Just for me, we had 55% of possession against the Bulldogs team that made about 11 errors, and I just thought that we're lacking a little bit of creation, and I wanted to see a little bit more, particularly from Liddell and Luke Brooks. Gary, he was one of our better players, I thought, on Sunday in terms of he put a couple of those kicks in that were pinpoint for tries, Luke. He defended really strongly, but then there are a couple of those just mind-numbing errors. I think a forward pass and a knock-on, and not getting in shape early enough. It was a bit of a mixed bag.
It was a mixed bag. The 40-20 he kicked as well was a beautiful kick. So there's another tick in the positive column. But I still don't think he's getting us around the park really well. I think we're still lacking direction. We're talking about a lack of game plan. I don't think he really knows what he's trying to achieve through each set. You have a look at the greats of the gameplay. You have a look at an Andrew Johns, and pretty much the entire set was mapped out and was finishing in the spot where he wanted to be to finish the set. I don't see that from Luke Brooks at all. He plays off the top of his head a little bit more, and I think we really lack that kind of structure of a set being planned out in advance. And I don't mean premeditated, but an idea of what you're doing with this play and this play to try and set yourself up throughout the set of six.
Steve, earlier this year, we've been talking about Brooks every week. And, he's been at the club since, I think, 2013 he made his debut. I feel like it's on both sides. I feel like he's the same player he was 4 or 5 years ago. I don't think there's been a development there. I don't 100% blame him for that, because I think the club has not necessarily surrounded him with the best coaching and losing players, et cetera. But, again, where do you sit long-term on the future of someone like Luke?
Yeah, look, if I can just widen it to halves, I'm really confused at the moment as to where we're heading with our halves. As you know, I'm a Brooks fan. I have been for a long time. I don't disagree with what you're saying, that there's not a lot of improvement. I don't disagree with what Gary's saying either as so far as his game management goes. But I do think he's a good footballer. And so I do like him. His effort is there every week. He's a good defensive half. His kicking game is good. His running game can be good, but his management is not good. And that's where the confusion comes in for me around where we're heading in the halves. So we're moving Dewey to 6 and Brooks at 7, and that doesn't look to be working. Maybe it needs more time, but at the moment it's not working. So what's the alternative? We've brought Hastings in. So Hastings goes to 7. So what happens there? Does that mean if there's no room for Brooks, then there's no reason he should be at the club? Or does he shift to 6? I think he'd be a good 6. I think a good running 6. If Hastings can be an organising half, that could work. But I can remember watching Hastings a number of years ago for Manly, thinking he runs around with no organisation. If that's the way we go, what happens to Dewey? Does Dewey go back to the centres? I'm not sure Dewey would want that. I'm not sure the club sees that for Dewey. So, I'm as confused as anyone. I like Brooks, but what we're doing at the moment is not working, but I don't see a clear direction for our future.
I haven't been able to watch Hastings this year, Gary, but he won a Man of Steel in England, but then by all reports, at times he was dropped to the bench this year. So he could be anything from a bargain buy to a disaster. But I think I'm at the point where I just think we need to try something different as our number 7.
One thing I will say about him is I haven't watched a lot of him play this year either. He has been moved around quite a bit. He's played a bit of fullback as well, so he hasn't just been in the halves. But one thing I will say is his problems throughout his career has been that the way he demands accountability amongst the players around him. Well, at the moment, having a look at what we've seen in a documentary, what we see on the field, there's not a lot of on-field leaders who are demanding that accountability from the players around them. So I think he could really be a positive in that regard, having a number 7 at least who's demanding high standards of the players around him. I don't really see Brooks as that type of player to chew out a player for making a mistake or to have a go at Little because the ball's not out in front of him. But I think if you have Hastings in there, I think Little would be very aware of, and the other players would be very aware of what his opinion was on their game.
Yeah, I mean, the concern I have with the 7 and the 9 is almost that they're too nice. I think they're both almost nice footballers. I think they'd look decent in good teams, but together with a struggling club and a struggling team, I don't know if it's working.
Well, you have a look at, like I've mentioned Andrew Johns a couple of times during this podcast already tonight. You have a look at the way he spoke to his hooker when he got poor service, or how he spoke to the forwards when they didn't get into the position that he wanted them to be. Do any of you two see Brooks kind?
I remember them watching Steve. I watched when they were playing together in the juniors, Moses and Brooks, and I go to a couple of reserve grade games at Leica. I know Mitchell Moses is not our favourite player of all time, but you could hear his colourful language from Rose Ed of the grandstand. He was demanding the ball, often overcalling the ball, whatever. But that was one thing that differentiated him from Brooks. Not saying that necessarily makes him a better player, but is that something in a halfback that maybe we've been lacking?
Yeah, absolutely. We lack it not only in our halfback, and we need our halfback to be like that. But we lack it we lack it in our leadership as well. Our captain came out this week and said, he's been too nice all season. You need someone with a hard edge so that when you are busted out there and when fatigue is really getting to you mentally, you got someone ripping it up here. So you put in that second effort. Everyone needs that.
Boys, we do have some positives in a minute. We'll get to them, but I think we do try and keep it real on the podcast because, we can only see off what we go off, and it's not all hunky-dory, even though we did win. Last negative, Gary, I had was just backline errors. 7 handling errors from the backline again. This has been consistent sort of this year, the backline making more errors than the forward pack. It's just something that frustrates me because some of them are just unforced, no pressure on.
That was my point I was going to raise. Is it's not only a lot of errors, they're unforced errors. The drop ball by Cheekham when Blore offloaded in the open, that sort of stuff is criminal. They have to be taking those chances. And if we're playing anyone else, you make those kind of errors, you don't win the game. So really, our back line for next year, no one really has any idea what it's going to look like because the majority of the players we have in there at the moment really don't deserve the spot in that back line. The errors are too great. They're not having enough impact on the game. And, I'm really confused as to what our backline is going to look like, considering at this point we're going in with a very similar squad to this year.
Steve, I think we'd all probably agree that Dane Laurie was the standout in the 1 to 5 in the backline this year. Nofaluma for me has been very underwhelming. Where do you sit on the 1 to 5 overall?
I think there's hope in Mamalo. I think, his first couple of games weren't terrific, but of late he's been good. Like they're going up for the high ball and he's making some good meters every game. So there's hope there. Nofaluma. Nofaluma can be, a very good player. Last year was good. This year's been very poor. I don't know. Our centres are a real concern, I think. We've got this fella coming from the UK. A lot of pressure on him to hit the ground running and be good because I can't see anyone, really jumping out at me as being a stand-up starter in the centres for next year. Obviously, Laurie is laid down at fullback.
Some positives, boys. I started again, Gary, with Stefano up front. He's 62 minutes he played, 15 runs for 160 metres. Compare that to his captain senior player, 4 runs for 41 metres in 27 minutes. Again, Stefano impressive.
Stefano was very impressive again on the weekend. I had him as my best player for the second week in a row, making plenty of meters, plenty of work. He hits the line hard when he's running, something we don't really have amongst our other forwards who kind of hit at half pace and get a reasonably quick play to ball. He does cause some damage to the defensive line. All season he's been quite effective in defence. Has I think about a 93% tackle efficiency, so he's not missing a lot of tackles. Yeah, as I said last week, I'm expecting really big things over the next couple of years from Stefano, and I can see him closing out this back half of our year as our best player.
How impressed have you been, Steve, with the Stefano, particularly post that training week he had in Origin?
Yeah, I think he's been exceptional, and he's only going to get better. We really need someone that can bend the line consistently. We need someone who can hit hard in defence consistently. I think his attack is probably stronger than his defence at this point in his growth, but that's not a negative because he's coming along beautifully.
Another young player, boys, that's had a bit of an injury interrupted time this year, Sean Bloor. 80-minute performance, Gary, on the weekend. I thought he's starting to run some harder lines. We haven't seen much of attack from him, particularly coming off the bench, but there's signs there he could quickly surpass someone like Luke Garner.
I would have Bloor in front of Garner already. I think he's only going to develop further from here. I think we're already fairly aware of what Garner's going to bring to the field every week. Bloor's only going to get better from here on out. What I really enjoyed the other day, we were talking about Stefano a moment ago, that kind of 1-2 punch, Stefano taking the first hit up and then Bloor doing a hit up straight after that. I thought that really got us on the front foot against the Bulldogs, which was really pleasing to see. He doesn't seem to be afraid of any work. And again, last week, he made it through the whole game without a missed tackle. Again, I think he's missed one tackle all season, Bloor, so he's progressing really, really well. And I'm still just waiting for that really big breakout game where he causes a little bit of havoc running out wide, because it's coming.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's gone, maybe not unnoticed, but that's been less mentioned this year, on the socials, is that more often than I can remember in the past, we actually punch down the middle of the field pretty well. Like we haven't had a great year, but if there is a positive to look at, starting from our back three, getting that set going, and then having those big forwards punching through the middle. I can remember consistently looking at us playing our fifth tackle on the 40-metre line, and that doesn't happen near as much now. We're often on halfway or over halfway for our fifth play, which puts our kickers in a much better position for the kick downfield. So that is one area that hasn't been talked about a lot, but I've noticed we've improved, and that is partially our forwards hitting hard and fast down the middle.
I think that's a really good point, Steve. I sort of think, I looked at that game on Sunday, Gary, and even though it was a 12-point margin, it was a bit of a bludger of a game. I thought I often looked at games when we used to play, almost in our halcyon days at Tim Sheen's, and we were a skillful team, but we were often, like Steve said, either the smaller team or we tried to move the ball sideways. This team looked bigger than the Bulldogs, and they really bullied them in the forwards. If it wasn't for some of those errors, they sort of dominated the collisions.
Yeah, most definitely. We've been speaking about not winning the collision and not winning that contact all year. That's how the modern game's won. That's how under the 6-again rules, you win the game in that collision. And it's good to see us starting to get on top in that regard, at least with a couple of younger players who are coming through. I think we're still a little... I like McKaylee for the same reason. He does cause some damage. I don't think he was as strong on the weekend. But outside of that, I think... And Leilua, again, was quite good in the collision. But outside of that, I think, especially with Tamo and even Offengawi a little bit, we're not dominating in that collision area of the game, which we did on the weekend, but we haven't throughout most of the season.
I think, Steve, it was probably a blueprint of Madge's coming in. I mean, at least going back, looking at his history at South, winning with a big forward pack. I guess my question to you, though, is that even though that's looking good, with these rule changes, is he going to be sort of caught on the hop a bit? Because we saw just an instance of, McKaylee. He's had some good games this year, but in the first 10 minutes, just caught out defensively where he just gassed or he wasn't concentrating. Do you think the big forward pack is the way to go, or do you think we sort of settled here now and we need to see some of these young players just find some of the edges around the game?
I still think there's room in the game for the big player. If you can get momentum through your big boppers going through the middle, and then having fast execution, from your back line, I think there's absolutely room for that. Defensively, it's interesting you bring that up because I had that as one of my negatives. Our marker defence and middle defence. I think you've just got to have you've got to have a really good defensive 13. In there, sitting in there behind the ruck, because your big guys are going to get busted at some point in the game.
Steve mentioned a moment ago about the impact of the bigger guys on the game. What I think is really important, it's not so much about the size of them. I think the way they run the ball is quite important. You can have a big guy that kind of lopes up the field and falls to the ground and gets a fairly slow play the ball. You're a lot better off when you have big guys that run the ball hard, win that kind of collision, and then are able to get a quick play of the ball. That's where the game's kind of won at the moment. So I really think it depends on that type of player. Some of the better players at that kind of bash and barge, quick, hard running, knocking a few players around and getting up for a quick play of the ball are those bigger players. So I think that really is a model of what you're looking at, but you've got to find the right ones. Like Tamo, he's not a small guy, but he's not a real impactful front rower. And I think that's kind of where that problem lies. I think you really need those guys that can provide a bit of impact into the collision.
And I think from that is that execution after the your big guy has made the break, and as Gary's saying, quick play the ball. But then you need really fast movement after that. You look at Kiri when he was playing there at East, and you look at Travojevic and how fast and how well they execute and create that space. We just do not create space because we don't execute quick enough. I think we've got the forwards to get the momentum, but we don't then do anything with it afterwards.
Yeah, and that's one of my main criticisms of kind of Luke Brooks in the half-back role at the moment. I don't think he's taken those right options at that time where we do get on the front foot, where we do have the defensive line backpedaling a little bit. And I don't think at those times we're taking the right decisions still. I think sometimes he chooses to run at the wrong time and pass at the wrong time. So he's got to make sure he's getting those decisions right.
Yeah, I think that on that point, Gary, Jacob Liddell, to me, that's an area I'd love to see Robbie Farah work with him, because Robbie was so good at knowing, when a marker was going to be offside or when you had a team on the back foot. And to me, Jacob's, he's quite twice as fast as Robbie was, but between the ears, it's just not quite coming together at the moment. I'll just throw a wild card at you boys. The lock forward position's been one that we've struggled to settle on it this year. And I've watched the game sort of evolve a bit. And, guys like Cam Murray and some of these dominant players in there, they're strong guys, big guys, but they're also good ball players. Could someone, Steve, like Adam Dewey, maybe be a lock forward and be that sort of link ball player where he doesn't have that responsibility of 5'8", and Hastings and Brooks could work together? Would that not work, or what do you think?
That's it's funny you mention that, because I was talking about that with a mate in the last week. So around that question of our halves, like we've got three halves for two spots. What are we doing? And I put that question: Could Dewey be a ball playing lock? And the comment that came back to me, which was a very valid one, was defensively he may struggle, and that may be the case. But is it worth working on? I don't know. I've heard from the club that Hastings has been brought to fill 13, or at least to give him an option to play, to try him at 13. So whether that's the case or not, I'm not sure. But if that is the case, then they are probably going down that route of a mobile, smaller but strong lock.
Yeah, I think kind of the talk that's kind of come up over the last couple of weeks about Connor Watson maybe being a target of the Tigers, I think that's kind of fill that same kind of role, that ball-playing lock. I think we've used them by there in little bits and pieces in games throughout the season. To me, though, what I'm hoping to see in that position pretty much next year is Tookie Simpkins taking that position over. I like the way he hits the line. I like how he looks to offload. From what I've seen, he has a decent pass before the line. I think he has the opportunity to kind of make that position his own. He's a little bit bigger than some of those other guys we've spoken about, and he's still only young. He's still only 19, so he's got a little bit of growing to do. But I can see him kind of filling that role really well for a club like ours.
Cool. All right, boys. Well, there's 4 weeks to go. We're sitting on 7 wins. I think mathematically, again, we can still make the finals. I guess, Steve, the frustrating thing is if we were just having our normal season, which is, 48% win and 11 wins, we'd probably make it. But typical Tigers, we're going to finish with probably 9 or 10 wins and outside again.
Yeah, well, we've only got ourselves to blame. We've lost games we shouldn't have lost. We should never have been beaten by North Queensland at Leichhardt Oval on that memorable, fateful day. So there's 2 points. We should have beaten the Warriors last week. There's 4 points. You put those 4 points in the mix, and we're almost specials to make the 8. But we'll probably end up beating Penrith and lose to Canterbury or something like that and finish 9th.
The run home, Gary, looks, Canterbury for me in round 25, that's going to be a win. Sharks is a 50-50, and then North Queensland this week. I suppose there's still a lot to play for because you could finish anywhere between, 14th and 8th or 9th.
Yeah, it's not impossible to sneak into the 8 for us. That glimmer of hope is still there. And I'm the type of person, I hear a lot of people saying, I just love the young guys. Let's put the young guys in and we're not going to make the 8 this year. I don't give up kind of like that. I want to keep fighting till that last possible chance is kind of disappeared. It's not a bad run home. It'd be a really good run home if we'd won 2 more games throughout the season. But we haven't. I personally don't think we've won enough leading up to take advantage of what is quite a good run home.
No, I think you're right, boys. I think we'll probably square our last 4. I think we'll win a couple and lose a couple. We've run out of time for part 1. We're going to come back in part 2 with Steve and Gary, and we're also going to be joined by Joel. We're going to be talking about the documentary and what the boys would do if they were Justin Pascoe. 3 main priorities heading into next year. Welcome back to part 2 of the West Tigers podcast. Steve and Gary are here, joined also by Joel Helms. Joel, you would have watched the documentary last night, episode number 2. Before we talk about Madge and some of the main players, do you think it's been a success for the club, the way it's been portrayed, or have you been left a little bit dumbfounded by aspects of it?
Dumbfounded. I think the intent was good. I think that in terms of exposure for an NRL club, for a sporting club, I think it's fantastic. You're going to expose yourself to a whole lot of different people, and the theory is brilliant. I think that where West Tigers are in the incubation period may not have been a great choice of years. I think Fox knew that they were going to get a whole lot of drama with West Tigers, and I think that it hasn't necessarily painted the club in a great light. I don't think it's painted Michael Maguire in a great light. I don't think it's painted some of the players in a great light. Just quickly, I don't want to get off track, but for example, in episode 2, Madge Maguire was heard to use the word that starts with C, that's often considered to be probably the most offensive thing you can call somebody. And I know that, I was sitting there watching it with my wife, and I know that there's going to be other partners and people watching. And so there was a few things about it that didn't quite leave me with, a great sense of this being a fantastic success and a great idea.
Gary, I know you're an NFL fan, and you mentioned Hard Knocks before. I've watched a lot of Hard Knocks, and I thought it would be a little bit more detailed and spread across the board. That's the thing I've been frustrated with. It seems like it's a lot about Madge and halftime sprays.
It really is a game day focused sort of show. I really wanted to see a bit more of the nitty gritty of what's happening at the club, kind of those recruitment kind of conversations at training, a little bit on kind of analysis of the upcoming game and where we might see we can attack an opposition side. I think that's really been lacking. To me, it's more of a YouTube kind of reaction video. So we get to see the coach react when a try is scored, or a coach react when something happens on the field, or we see the reaction of the players when something's happened. It's really not adding anything greatly to those games. So we've all lived through those games. We've watched those games. We've felt those games. And really, we're being asked to live through those games again. I really don't see a lot of benefit from it other than seeing how the coach reacted to that.
Steve, looking at it, well, 2 points from a fan's perspective. How have you found it? And also just from the club's perspective, do you think they'd be just a little bit alarmed at some of the stuff that they're seeing?
Yeah, well, from a fan's perspective, from a sports fan perspective, I'm actually riveted to it. I'm enjoying the drama because I love sport. As a Tigers fan, it's hard to watch because it's reality peeled back. And from the club's perspective, I'm of the understanding that there has been a lot of footage of players at home with family. There's been a lot of footage of the workings of the club in and around the office, and I think the club would hope that some of that footage gets used in future episodes. And in fact, I think the club have seen cuttings of what could become part of the next episode, because I don't think anything's in concrete yet, but it's supposed to be less about game day and more about the organisation in episode 3, apparently at this stage.
Interesting to see if the club does come out and make any comment about it throughout. Let's talk about the main player, Joel, the head coach, Michael Maguire. I guess it's absolutely no surprise to me, some of the halftime sprays, and they're 100% real, and I think we knew he was that style of coach. And I think Craig Bellamy probably uses those sorts of sprays and other coaches at times. I guess my question to you, you're a professional sort of counsellor. Do you think those style of motivation that Madge is using is outdated to young guys, or do you think it's effective and we just don't have the roster? How did you see some of those sprays?
Well, I thought the body language from the players, I mean, it's obviously a talking point that everybody has sort of picked up on, is just how quiet they sit, their heads down, and they really do look worn down and sort of like they've, it looks to me like there's no shock value in delivering the spray anymore. And once the shock value is gone, there's no point doing it. There is no evidence to suggest, because, you know, I work in an industry, and probably all you guys work in fields that are evidence-based. So what you bring into any particular situation in a given day is something that's been researched and studied, and, you know, you do it for a particular reason. See, I can't see any research that says the coach that gives the biggest, hardest sprays gets the most wins. Yeah, there's no evidence to suggest that. Otherwise, the best coach would be just the one that's the best orator that can go in there and peel the paint off the walls the best. You know, that's not the way it works. So, you know, by the look of it, whenever the game's not going our way, that's what we get. And I wonder if the players it's just a broken record, you know. So there's no evidence to suggest that that's the best way of doing it, but that's going to get the best possible result. You know, the thing is too, is that as a man, and I know that as I've grown older, I've come less and less out of my emotional brain and more into what's called my wise mind, which is more using, you know, the higher level thinking and parts of my brain. And I don't think it builds respect. I think people that go around yelling and shouting and that's all they kind of have, I don't think it builds respect. I think that, you know, you want your comeback. I think you want to come back into the sheds at halftime. You know, you've got a problem. Coach, give us some solutions. Give us some strategies. You know, what are you seeing in the grandstand that we're not picking up on? You know, rather than just drilling them again about, you know, how they got to grow up and they got to do this and all of that, and game after game after game, it's completely pointless. And just one more thing, you know, I was kind of not shocked because I've seen inside the dressing rooms before, but, you know, you got guys that are aged 20 to 30 and you like, I know when I was in that age bracket, and probably still to a degree now, I like a visual representation of what you're trying to tell me. Don't just yell it at me. I'm not going to listen. But, you know, where's the whiteboard? Where's the whiteboard to say, you know, this is what Reynolds is doing and, you know, this is what we should try in the other half. And I remember, you know, some of the things I remember hearing about some of the other coaches, you know, they would be picking out one particular player and saying, you know, that winger is jamming in and, and that kind of thing. Draw it on the whiteboard. There's evidence to suggest that's the best way to get through to young guys. But I just felt like he was just you guys might disagree. It just felt like he was the teacher that was just yelling at the kids, and they've all heard it before, and they never get. There's no follow through. They never get suspended. The letter never goes home. They just get the spray, and then they get to go home.
In essence, just to take that a little bit further, Joel, in essence, a leader needs to be many things, but one of the most important is an effective communicator. And I'd imagine there's no more time, no more critical time than in that 10, 15 minutes at half time to get your message across succinctly, accurately, and purposefully. And it just seems to me two things. One, Madge has only got one method of communication, and that's an emotional outburst. And that wears thin, as Joel says. But secondly, the thing I noticed, he actually becomes an ineffective communicator because he gets so emotionally wound up, he can't get out what he's trying to say, and it just becomes noise, and it's not articulated. And I'm sure there's more to him than that. I'm sure we're not seeing it all, and I want to be respectful of him in saying that. But from what we're seeing, that's a little bit concerning.
The thing that's kind of worrying me as well, that they're all very good points you both have raised, but there's also only one voice we're seeing in that dressing shed. It's a team environment, and what's coming across in the documentary is one voice only. There's not the captain up speaking. And I know every team that I've kind of been a part of in my life, at some point, the coach will speak, and then the captain has a bit of a say as well. And I really haven't seen that from any of our players at all in both episodes. I did see once where Madge asked Brooks his opinion, but apart from that hasn't gone across. And that's really worrying. And even to the point of Maguire at times is saying, Moe, you've said this. So talking about Mbai, saying you've driven this. But why isn't he calling on those types of people to speak if it's their idea he's trying to get across? And that kind of, he speaks a lot about the players setting those standards, and the players, these were your ideas. This is what you said we stood for. But the players aren't putting that across in those situations. Now, it may be different at training, and the players may have that input at training, but no team works effectively with only one voice. There needs to be a wide range of voices, and we're not seeing that.
I totally agree with you guys on that, and it was quite startling for me looking at some of that footage in the sheds, either the pre-game sort of rev up speech or half time, and just seeing our last three captains, Moses Mbai and Luke Brooks and James Tamo, they were the three guys I was looking at, and just seeing the lack of reaction out of those guys. I guess my final question on Madge, Joel, is given it this atmosphere or this documentary, we've seen it looks like it's one voice. We look at that coaching box and it looks like he's the only one talking. We look at that dressing room, he's the only one talking. Is he to blame for creating an environment like that, or is it the fact he has a playing group that lacks confidence or lacks motivation or lacks leadership? Do they have to take some of the blame for the fact that this dressing room appears to be run purely by Madge? And should we feel sorry for Madge or not?
Yeah, look, I think the funny thing about the game of rugby league is often the overreaction. Like if we look at say, for example, Penrith, and I know I'm going a little bit off track here, but just to make my point, like the reason why Penrith fought so hard to get Ivan Cleary back was because they at some point in their history they made a declaration that they were never going to lose another Brad Fittler. They lost Brad Fittler to the Roosters, and basically that he was he was the bright light that came through that club, the local junior, and they were never going to let that happen again. And so when the threat of Ivan Cleary bringing Nathan Cleary to the West Tigers came up, they did everything they could to make sure that wasn't going to happen. And that included, getting Ivan back, the guy that they'd sacked, and getting rid of a coach that hadn't been in the top four and all of that sort of stuff, right? And I just wonder if the West Tigers have been so burnt before with coaches and things not working out that they found Madge and they thought, yeah, he's won a comp in the Super League and he's won a comp with South Sydney. Let's just give him the keys to the city. There you go, Madge, run it. You do what you need to do. And I think that's created a vacuum of voices. I think he's probably maybe by nature communication style, whatever it might be. Madge was pretty burned by what happened at South at the end there, and I've got that on pretty good authority, and that's, he really did take that personally, and I wonder if it's just kind of he's created that vacuum around himself as a protection mechanism, and the club's done it out of a lack of confidence and after a history of things not going the way that they planned. So I wonder if that's sort of some of the chemistry that's in the mix. But what I do know is that it's unsustainable. Something is going to have to change, because if what we saw in those first two episodes are any sort of reality-based, if that's what it's really like, even at half that degree, something's got to change.
Just to add on what Joel was saying, in my opinion, it really is that coach's responsibility to create an environment where you're creating leaders, where you're creating people, whether they're shy, whether they're young, that they feel comfortable stepping into an environment where their voice can be heard. Now, you have a look at some of those halftime reactions, those full-time reactions. I'm not surprised there's not a lot of people putting their hand up and wanting to speak, because that doesn't fill you with the confidence to actually say, here's my idea. Because if it's the wrong idea, what's the reaction going to be? And you, like I spent 20 years as a teacher, and creating an environment where the people who you are working with are encouraged and welcome to give their ideas is really crucial. And I don't think you get that with the type of language that Maguire's using. And yes, I'm coming from a teacher point of view, and I wasn't dealing with young men like he is. But even a lot of that heavy language, I don't think necessarily, not all the young guys kind of appreciate that kind of language and appreciate being spoken to in that manner. And it takes away that opportunity for them to put their ideas forward.
Steve, where do you sit just on Madge going forward? Because, I mean, me and Joel were really excited when he come to the club, and now 2.5, nearly 3 years in, and probably going backwards, it's fair to say. Do you think, he's been hung out to dry coming to a club that's been struggling for a decade, or you think he's been the master of his own demise?
Yeah, I definitely don't think he's been hung out to dry. He's an experienced coach, successful coach. He should have the skill set with years of experience to be able to adapt to the environment that he finds himself in. I don't see it working. Before this documentary, was aired, we have not improved. In 2 or 3 years, that the team doesn't look any better than it did 3 years ago. In fact, I think it looks worse. So it's not working. Is that all Madge's fault? No, absolutely not. I agree that I'm not 100% behind the way he communicates and what we're seeing. I'd like to think that's not all that there is to him. But there's also a responsibility with our playing group. The players, they are elite footballers. They're professional footballers, and their reactions and their attitudes are poor. And I think it was actually highlighted beautifully on the documentary last night, where Mad said, you guys have had one win and you're off getting massages. Like, it's as if they're just happy to be first graders, right? They've got the kit, they've got the tracksuit, they've got the badge, and they're happy with it. And it doesn't matter if they finish first or last, or whether they make 150 metres or 40 metres, right? They're just happy to be first graders and living the dream, right? And so there has to be some accountability. So that, I haven't answered your question. No, I don't think what's happening with Madge is sustainable, and I think we need to go in a different direction. But it pains me to say that, because I think the players really need to take some responsibility.
I was just going to say, I think we're all, everybody but Eddie here is a parent. And I think that it's parenting 101. And I think Moses Mbai did say, he's a bit of a dad to us, but it's parenting 101 to follow through. You mentioned accountability, Steve. If you go and rant and rave with your kids, but they know they've just got to listen to the rant and rave, and there's no penalty, there's no follow through. They just sit there, and that's exactly what a child does. They just sit there and they go, okay, I know Dad's going to rant for the next 5 minutes, and then I'll go back to my device. I don't have to worry about getting grounded or paying a penalty. And I think there's a big degree of that. But I think the thing that worries me about West Tigers is I don't think there's anybody in the organisation from top to bottom that I can see that's really driving high standards. And maybe Tim Sheen's the man to do it, but I think that, and we've spoken about it before, there is a lack of attention to detail across so many areas of this business that's what it looks like from the outside. And that's my observations from some minor visits into the organisation, is that there doesn't seem to be any guy or girl there that's driving standards across departments like media department, memberships, promotions, all sorts of things, and within the football department. It just seems to be close enough is good enough. That's what it looks like to someone like myself who's watched and lived and loved this club since day one.
That close enough, good enough statement really rings true to me. That's, as a teacher, that was part of my daily mantra to the kids. I don't want you doing enough to keep me happy. I want you to do enough to be the best you can be. And I think across the board, if we look at our playing squad, I think a lot of them would be happy just to do enough to keep the coach happy and keep the coach off their back. But that's not the reason that's not translating to the field, is because if that's the standard you're driving at training, if that's the standard you're driving within the club and it's across the board, then you're not going to be at the level to compete on the weekend. I think that's a real issue. I think that close enough is good enough attitude is the downfall of many organisations, not just football teams.
All right, boys. Well, before I asked you just about, because we come on part two, I wanted to ask you all, if you were Justin Pascoe, what were your three priorities going forward? But just any other, Steve, anything else to come out of last night or the documentary? If you were a player at the moment, if you were a Luke Brooks or a James Tarmow watching it, would you be angry, or would you be thinking, as a player, maybe we need to step up more and help the coach and set some of these standards ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be angry for one of two reasons. One, if I have been misrepresented, because at the end of the day, we don't know that. We don't know what's on the cutting room floor, as the saying goes. So if Fox have chosen to show moments of silence, I was told today that by someone who's witnessed in the sheds, Maguire walk in and saying, "Righto, boys, what's going wrong? What's going wrong today?" And they talk about, and so I was told that happens. So yes, I would be angry if I've been misrepresented, which may be the case. All right, but I don't know. I would also be angry if what I'm seeing, if what there is true, because they're not stepping up, and they need to help. There needs to be collaboration in leadership. There needs to be collaboration in growth. There needs to be collaboration in moving forward, and so they need to be a part of the solution rather than the problem, if they're given the opportunity.
Just one other thing that comes to mind, I think it's a really important point. We do often talk a lot about West Tigers selling the vision, but having some transparency around why decisions are made and how decisions are made and what the processes are around them. The irony is, and I think it's a really good reflection on where the club's at in regards to leadership, is that they have put their hands, they've at some point somebody's gone, this is a really good idea. Let's open the doors. Let's be fully transparent. But they have not gone through and thought it through and thought, but what if we don't like what we're actually showing the world? Instead of controlling the narrative, instead of putting something together themselves, controlling the message, they've gone, here you go. Look at all our dark corners. And Fox has found them, and Fox has found the problems, and Fox is highlighting all the deficiencies or many of the deficiencies. And, instead of being, professionally competent, being able to control the narrative, they've just completely lost control of it. And that encapsulates so much of what we talk about.
Just one thing I would like to mention before we finish is Eddie asked a moment ago about whether the players would be happy with it. One thing that I found quite disappointing in it was a couple of situations, actually. The Simpkin era where Madge is telling him that he's a footballer and that he's got to get to that tackle, and he doesn't move. He's out on his feet and he doesn't move to get into position to make the tackle, and Souths go through straight past him. I think it was the Souths game. That, to me, that's a really horrible position to put a young player in. That to really highlight that error that he's made, not in the middle of a game of football. It was highlighted in the middle of a television show.
That has nothing to do with what his job is. And I think that kind of was really unfair to the players. The other one was Luke Brooks crying. There was no context around what he was crying. I was there that night. I saw what had happened. I know why he was in tears. He was being abused by fans over the fence. Now, they showed that as him just being upset over a game. It wasn't just being upset over a game. There was so much more to that kind of situation that we don't know about. I heard the abuse that he copped that night, and it was personal, and it was disgusting. And then to kind of see that played out as part of entertainment on a TV show, that side of it is really disappointing. And that's where I think the players may have a little bit of a problem with it, because it wasn't something they were in control of. They didn't have a say over whether this was going to be made. And whether that kind of situation was going to be highlighted in a show like this, I don't think is really fair.
Well, still 2 episodes to go, and like you said, Gary, there may be more sort of around the grounds in the next 2. We might see a little bit more in the offices or at training. Hopefully, it's not just Madge giving sprays, because even though Madge has been the centrepiece, I don't think this has necessarily been a good thing for him. If I was another club watching this and looking at his players staring at the ground and him spraying everyone every week, I don't know if we'll be rushing out to grab him if he's on the open market in the next couple of years as a coach. So let's wait and see. If you were Justin Pascoe, though, boys, what would be your priorities moving forward? I'm going to make you CEO, board, in charge of everything at the moment. Joel, I'll start with you. What would be, you can give us your number 1 priority. You can go from 3 to 1, however you want to do it.
Number 1 priority is to find a person or people who are immensely respected within the game, and this may be Tim Sheens. We haven't actually heard that this is going to be part of his charter, but someone to run a fine-tooth comb through the whole organisation, to really review it from top to bottom, what's working, what's not working, what's the evidence to suggest that the strategies and things that have been implemented by the club have worked or not worked, and why it hasn't worked. So a really thorough review, and maybe it doesn't need to be a rugby league person, or there should be at least be some maybe non-rugby league aspect within that review for things like marketing and that side of the business. That review needs to look at are the right people in the right chairs. Are we equipping ourselves for success, or are we equipping ourselves just to keep tic-tacking along? So that sort of falls under that same umbrella. But I think and I harp on about it, and I know I'm a broken record, but just get on with the job of selling some sort of vision around where this club's going. I think that there's just crickets when it comes to talking about what the club's aspiring to be and what the future looks like, and take as I said last time I was on the pod, take the fans on some sort of journey. At the moment, the West Tigers fans have all got to meet the club at more than halfway, I believe. Club's not driving it enough.
All right, Gary, it's your turn. If you were in the chair tomorrow, what would be your first phone call or your first thing you'd prioritise?
Well, there's a couple of issues for me. I think the standards at the club need to be at a higher level. Having a look at Justin, I don't think he's driving the standards at a level that I'll be happy with at an organisation. I think if he's not capable of doing that himself, same as we talk about Madge not having the right coaches around him, I think he probably needs to build a better team around himself. So, and that, as Joel said, that sort of person coming in could be Tim Sheens. We don't know, but I think he needs a little bit of help there as well. I don't think Maguire's the only one who needs help there. I think Pascoe needs a little bit of help around him as well. And I'll be seriously reviewing the coaching staff at the club at the moment. To me, Maguire comes across as too one-dimensional. I don't think he has the ability to adapt to the modern game. I think he's still trying to play the same way he was playing back in 2014. And I think that's holding us back as a club as well. So I'm at the point where I'm ready to see a change at coach.
Steve, we spoke on the last couple of podcasts about sort of, Tim Sheens coming in and the chain of command being a little bit messy. What sort of changes would you look to make if you were someone like Justin?
Yeah, so I've probably looked at it through the lens at a corporate level, and probably touching on both what Joel and Gary have said. One, or the first one I'll mention, is to know your corporate identity. And I just think that is so important. And that's a process. And it's not It's not a airy fairy up in the clouds type of statement. You got to know what do we stand for, what do we believe, what do we want, and you've got to articulate that, and you've got to have everyone involved in deciding that and getting on the same page. And from that, you then articulate the three or four statements that you are absolutely committed to, and everything you do, from cleaning the change rooms, a la the All Blacks, right? What are you committed to? The standards you are committed to. Every single thing you do is driven by those commitments that you've agreed upon. So that's the first thing they need to do is get a corporate identity. And the other thing, which it's not more or less important, and this is what Gary said, they must demand excellence in every aspect of everything they do, football and non-football related. And you do that by evaluating every single thing you do. So you come off at half time and you say, was that excellent by our definition of excellence? And if it wasn't, why wasn't it? And you know what? That fan day we did last Saturday, was that excellent? And if it wasn't, why wasn't it? And what have we got to do to fix it? And what do we do tomorrow to fix it for next week? Not what do we do in a month's time or a year's time or at the end of the season when we evaluate. No, this is weekly, cyclically done, ongoing. And standards of everything must be excellent. And if it's not, well, then what are we here for?
Really, I think I've changed my answer. I think I'd be appointing Joel and Steve to actually run a review of our club. That's my new answer.
Got me motivated there, Steve. Just that last minute or so. So I think leadership's definitely something we've identified, not just on the field, boys, but off the field. And I know everyone's trying their best, and Justin and Madge and the playing group, but something does have to change. Joel, I mean, I look at, is it too simple? I'd just put down, do everything possible, and it comes under the terms of review as well, to find the reasons why we don't have a good roster. And if that, because I know clubs like Melbourne, of course, they are probably miles a better run, or they have better coaching staff, but they also have 7 or 8 Origin players, and so do South, and so do the Roosters, and so do Penrith. And that's the reason they're at the top of the competition at the moment. We don't have those quality players. But I'm sure there's more reasons why they're not coming through or we're not able to sign them. I'd have to identify why we aren't able to do that. And if Madge is part of that problem, then I'd have to look to move on from him.
Yeah, for sure. And look, it's a multifaceted sort of question, isn't it, Eddie? The thing is that, when you drill down into the politics of it, basically coaches, it's like any sort of position in those sorts of organisations. You might have the chairman's support, you may not have the CEO's support, or whatever the mix may be. It's often not clear cut like that. But do we know? Do the people who are running this club and are choosing to back or not back a coach or a CEO or whoever it might be in the organisation know exactly what the factors are that affect their performance? For example, is there actually a kernel or a truth behind the rumour that we can't get star players because they just don't want to play under Madge? Is that true? Is that something that whether we've assessed, it's a fact, and have the evidence to support this is a fact or not a fact? When we missed out on Josh Addo-Carr, did we review what happened? If Justin Pascoe wasn't involved, did he pull the recruitment team and Madge in and say, guys, what went wrong? What happened? What can we do better? What lessons have we learnt from this that we can implement moving forward? That's what makes the organisation stronger, is that constant, as Steve was saying, that constant desire to be better, learn from what hasn't worked out. So that's where I'm at, is that I don't see that, and I see mixed messages. Like I think I heard Justin Pascoe say that he wasn't involved in player recruitment, but there's a picture of him in the Telegraph sitting at the table in the coffee shop directly opposite James Roberts, who they were talking about giving a contract to. Of course he's involved in recruitment. Have we reviewed what the best people are that have those discussions with players? Are we selling too many mixed messages? There's so many things that are so many places where this train is coming off tracks that need to be looked at and determined and improved.
All right, boys, we've got about 5 minutes, so just quick answers, last few. Gary, Steve talked on corporate identity, and Joel talking about messaging and change of command. Do the club need to sort of sell us almost like a 5-year plan, like a vision for the fans? I know that thing can be fraught with danger, but at least it shows something. I know Canterbury put out something years ago that said they want to win 2 comps and they haven't won anything. But do you think that would be something that shows initiative or optimism about the future?
At the moment, I don't think that fans have any idea what recruitment strategy is. To me, it looks like we're looking at focusing on bringing youth through and trying to supplement around that with a few players. But we're not clear about that. There's no message coming out where we're going to turn ourselves into a development club. There's none of those sort of ideas coming through. At the moment, we're 10 years without finals. It doesn't look like it's going to be a much different roster next year. I think it's really important to get that message across to fans of a glimmer of hope, a light at the end of the tunnel that's not a train coming towards us. Because you have a look, the Philadelphia 76ers a number of years ago were in a really awful spot, and they traded away their best players. And they came up with the term, which I didn't like, was trust the process. And it went throughout their organisation. And it involved getting number 1 draft picks and actually throwing games to get in a position to get number 1 draft picks. And it was all about trusting that process. But it was a message that the club and its supporter base could rally behind. We don't really have anything to pin hopes to. We haven't signed one established NRL player for next year. We're bringing back a couple of guys over from England. There's nothing for the fan base to kind of pin that hope to that we're going to be better next year or that we're going to be better the year after. That there's nothing for us to look forward to at the moment, except probably more years without being in the finals.
Steve, any final thoughts? You've got about 45 seconds.
I'll just reiterate what I said. I suppose, I think all those points that have been made are good. A lot of them are like the top layer of the cake, and we've got to get the base right. And the base right is knowing who we are and getting standards in place. And until we do that, we're not going to go anywhere.
All right, boys, before we go, I'm just going to touch on Joel's favourite topic of all time. He hasn't mentioned it this year. Home grounds, Joel. You've got 3 or 4 words you've got to answer me. If you were Justin Pascoe, 2022 onwards, what's your home ground strategy?
1 home ground. Pick it. Stick with it.
Doesn't matter where.
Football stadium. SFS.
Gary, home ground?
I'll be looking at hopefully Liverpool getting up off the ground, something like that.
Steve?
Hart says Leichhardt. I was hopeful for Homebush until they put the kibosh on it. So, yeah, I think Liverpool would be a good one. If not, Bankwest, but just pick one.
Yeah, answer's a pineapple at the moment. I'd probably pick Sydney Football Stadium once it's up and running, but it's sort of slow going there at the moment. All right, boys, it's been a bumper podcast. Thanks for your time. We'll see you all in the next week or 2.
Thanks, boys.
See ya.
Cheers, guys.